UK5G, and it's great to welcome you all to this webinar. I'm just going to run through what's going to happen, and then we'll get on with the business. And so, as you can see, we're here to really launch a white paper that has been written by CGI, looking at the challenges and opportunities for the water industry, and the opportunities presented by the convergence of technology. What's going to happen is that I'm going to say a couple of words about UK5G to begin with. That'll be very brief. And then we'll go over to Stuart Brand, who's the VP for the water sector at CGI, and Andrew Palmer, who's a consulting expert at CGI and 5G. And they'll talk about the document, the paper that's been produced. And then we're going to go on to a panel where we're going to be moderated by Jonathan Abra, who's the water and wastewater specialist at the Knowledge Transfer Network. And we'll also be joined by Harry Armstrong from Ofwat, Jez Heath from SES Water, Rachel Dyson from Water Resources East, Stuart Brand, also, of course, from CGI, and Andrew from CGI on the panel. And we should be over in about an hour and a half. So first of all, I just wanted to say a couple of words about UK5G. We're an impartial network of networks. We've been commissioned by the Department of Culture, Media, Digital Culture, Media and Sport to deliver an innovation network around the theme of 5G. And we bring together a lot of other networks across the country in an impartial way. And we're there to develop and support an ecosystem around 5G and to manage activities around 5G and to promote what the UK is doing in 5G internationally. We have currently 3,600 registered users, 1,500 organizations. We do a lot of things, have a substantial website. And for those who don't know it, we also produce a magazine, here it is, that we produce every quarter that tells you all about what's happening in 5G across the country. So, and we've also supported the DCMS funded competitions that are looking at 5G. If we can go to the next slide. So really we're an innovation network, and the depth of knowledge that we have come from our members. We wouldn't be anything without the membership, and a lot of the work that happens is pro bono. We're supported by a substantial advisory board and a number of working groups that look at different aspects of 5G across the country. And for this particular event, we're very appreciative for CGI's support and input to this white paper. A lot of the issues around 5G are about the use of 5G and its use in vertical industries or industries. Vertical industries is a term that the technology industry tends to use for anything else that isn't the technology industry. But anyway, so CGI have a great deal of knowledge about the water industry, and we're very delighted to tap into that. So if we go on to the next slide. So why 5G? Well, there's a lot of numbers that fly around about 5G. The Vodafone WIPI economics report that was a sort of meta report on a lot of other reports around 5G talk about 150 billion boost to productivity over 10 years. There's a lot of numbers that fly around like that, and certainly 5G is an important technology. It's a building block of digital transformation, and it needs to be looked at alongside the other areas of digital transformation. It's an enabler really for AI, cloud, big data, massive IoT deployments, immersive technologies. All of that is sort of knitted together really through 5G. And what we're really seeing is that with 5G, the promise of ultra low latency, ultra reliability, massive machine-to-machine deployments and what have you, are going to take a little while before they're really locked in nationally. I would say 2023, 2024 before those kind of applications with what's called standalone 5G are common across the country. So the time to explore this technology and to really benefit from it for industries is now. And I have to say that when I last looked at the DCMS funded projects that are happening across the country, I think there's 17 at the moment. And that's one of them is a very large urban connected community project in the West Midlands, which is really multiple projects. And there's shortly going to be announcements of a number of others. And though all those projects are exploring applications in areas like manufacturing, the creative industries, transport, logistics, agricultural technology, tourism, healthcare, you name it. And what they're doing is exploring applications and use cases that hopefully will become very substantial business cases or businesses in due course. And of course, exploring the capabilities of what 5G can do in things like private networks and neutral host applications and what have you. I have to say that I'm not aware of publicly funded substantial 5G projects in the utilities sector, but we're particularly in the water sector. So I think the time to experiment here is now. And it's certainly a sector that's open, I think, to some of the possibilities that 5G technologies can bring. And so without further ado, I'll hand over to Stuart and we'll find out what they discovered in their document that they're launching today. Thank you very much.
So thanks, Bob. So good morning, my name's Stuart Brand, and I'm Vice President at CGI in the UK, looking after, amongst other things, the business that we do in the water sector. And just for the record, today I'm representing my colleague, Graham Hainsworth, who along with Andrew worked on the report, but unfortunately he couldn't make this session today. So I wanted to start by thanking Bob and the UK5G team for the opportunity to participate in the creation of this paper. Here at CGI, we've been working with UK water companies for, gosh, since probably around the mid-70s. And with many of those early projects, looking at how we could remotely monitor and control assets. And I think it's fair to say that one of the things that's always been seen as a constraint to the art of the possible is the capacity and the capability of the comms. And so it's really exciting to consider the possibilities and the capabilities that 5G technology could bring, allowing the industry to take forward initiatives that simply haven't been possible in the past. So if we could just move to the next slide, please. So there's a picture of the paper and a link, so people can click on that link and you can register and download a copy that you can read while you're enjoying the discussion. So again, next slide, please. So before we dive into some of the potential solutions, and with apologies to those colleagues on the line that from the industry, I appreciate I'll probably be teaching you to suck eggs a little bit here. I wanted to take about 10 minutes to reflect on the challenges that the water sector faces here in 2020. I mean, for companies in England and Wales, we're now into the 4th decade since privatisation. So hopefully this will set a little bit of context for the report and for our subsequent discussion. So I'm going to do that by picking out 3 themes: the environmental challenge, the asset challenge, and the challenge brought about by the demands of customers. So it's difficult to believe sometimes, I know, especially on damp mornings here in the UK, but we are at a very real risk of running out of water. How can that possibly be? I hear you cry. Surely we live in one of the wettest countries in Europe. Well, it's a scenario that we referenced in the report, one called out by Sir James Bevan, the Chief Exec of the Environment Agency, that he calls the jaws of death. Basically, it's an imbalance between supply and demand. So as individuals, here in the UK, we use huge amounts of water in our daily lives, and most people just have absolutely no idea how much water they use. In fact, there was a survey conducted earlier this year for Water UK that revealed that 46% of people thought that their household used fewer than 20 litres of water per day. The true figure is much, much higher, over 140 litres per person per day, with an average family of 4 using maybe 500 litres per day. I mean, just to visualize that, that's the same as 250 2-litre bottles of your favorite fizzy drink. It's a huge amount. And no matter how much it rains, the environment only has the capacity to provide so much water. So when you add in the impact of climate change, of an ever-increasing population, the margin between demand and available supply gets ever narrower, until, according to Sir James, the lines cross in maybe 20 years' time, and we no longer have enough for our needs. I mean, in addition to the simple fact of the raw material, climate change also brings significant operational risk to water companies, with extreme weather events playing havoc with day-to-day activities. And I'm sure, like me, you can't help but feel that TV images of severe flooding events seem to be more common than they were in the past. And also on environment, the water industry is a major user of energy. So treatment processes are energy intensive. And if you think about those 250 bottles a day, the energy cost of delivering it to every household is pretty high. Water is quite heavy stuff. So if we're to meet our target for net zero emissions, then the water sector has a big role to play. So if we move on to assets then, I mean, it might seem blindingly obvious, but the water industry has a lot of assets. I mean, electricity and gas companies have one set of wires or pipes going to each house, but the water industry has double that, one for clean and another for waste. And then on top, you have all the infrastructure for production, storage, treatment, and so on. It's difficult to put an accurate value on that infrastructure, but if you take off what's regulated capital value as a metric, you get a sum somewhere north of 70 billion. I mean, not that you could ever do it, but Water UK estimated the replacement value of the industry's assets as being well over 250 billion. So since privatization, the industry's invested something like 150 billion in capital and expenditure on assets, so about 40% of revenue. That's a huge amount, way in excess of what a typical organization would spend on capex. But with this level of investment, even with this level of investment, there's still some pretty old assets in operational use. And we've all read stories about how some of our cities are still heavily reliant on Victorian age sewers. And at some point, they will need to be replaced, enhanced, or decommissioned. And politically, it seems unlikely that there is going to be a will for higher bills to fund increasing levels of capital spend. So the challenge really is whether the industry can get more for less. Can it extend the life of existing assets by adopting different ways of operating them? Can it avoid the need to build new assets through that extension of life? And can it keep reducing the cost of operating the assets it has to create in order to build additional headroom for the investments that are required? So in making these decisions, the industry always had to be mindful of risk. People in industry cannot survive for very long without water. And let's not forget that we drink this stuff. So a mistake or a problem in treatment genuinely could kill people. So the asset and infrastructure challenge is made all the more difficult because of the nature of these assets. I mean, they are all over the place. And in the context of this conversation, all over the place means locations that are very remote, very difficult to access, and not least about, when you think about it, underground, underwater even. Traditionally, these assets have been operated, maintained, and repaired by teams of people working across the country. So automation is one thing when you're talking about a self-contained system in a factory, but it's quite another when the production line is stretched across the landscape. So last but definitely most not least when it comes to the things that keep water industry leaders awake is responding to and meeting the demands of their customers. I think it's probably fair to say that the focus on the customer is one that's evolved over the decades, partly I think driven by regulatory incentives, but in more recent years, most definitely by virtue of customer demand and expectation. I mean, dealing with your water company might not be the most exciting conversation that any of us have, but our expectations of how we interact with companies have been raised across the board, particularly in the digital arena. We expect instant online access to services. Most of us are quite happy to receive bills and correspondence by email rather than by post. We definitely do not expect to spend time sitting on the phone to a call center when we have a query. And in part, the industry has become a victim of its own success. Services are so reliable that the expectation is of a service that never fails. And if it does, customers will demand immediate information about the problem and when it might be resolved. They simply can't understand why the company does not know immediately when there's a service issue. So we talked about the investment needs of the industry, and clearly in order to support that expenditure, the companies need to generate income in the main in England and Wales, at least through billing customers. As a commodity, we can't live without. These charges are not really optional for us, but in practice, increasing numbers of people are unable or unwilling to pay. Water poverty is a societal challenge, but it does reinforce the need to maximize efficient operation of the companies in order to keep charges as low as possible. Another theme is the desire of many customers to see and understand the societal value that organizations they deal with provide. So in addition to the services that the customer is buying, what additional value is that organization contributing to society? Now, the water companies have a bit of an advantage here because by definition, they're local businesses and they're ideally placed to be front and center in the local community, leading on environmental and social projects and so on. And in that way, building trust and legitimacy with their customer base. So I've touched on a few themes there. We've drawn that a little bit out in more detail in the report, and then for the purposes of today, to provide a little bit of context to our discussion in the Q&A. And now I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Andrew Palmer, to elaborate a little bit further on how these themes might be impacted by the deployment of 5G tech and some of the opportunities that it presents.
Hi, thank you, Stuart, and thanks to Bob for the introduction. So yeah, as Stuart said, I'm a consulting director in the telecom sector, and I worked on the paper with Graham to look at the 5G angle in terms of how 5G communications can help transform the water industry. As Stuart touched on, the water industry challenges around around the finite resources in terms of the amount of water, having to maintain a large asset inventory, and also customer expectation and demands is, it's a fairly severe set of challenges there. And we've just recently had the AMP7 Innovation Challenge has been issued by Ofwat, and that's mandating about £50 billion worth of investment by the water companies over the next 5 years, which is a significant increase on the last AMP. And there's certain drivers in there, some severe targets around reducing leakage, but also improving service to customers, but also mandating very small price increases. So it's a similar picture to where the telecoms is, of trying to do more with less, and make the investment stretch further. If we think about the telecoms industry, the projected bill to cover the whole of the UK in what we're calling fast fibre is about £35 billion and expected to take another 10 to 15 years to complete. So if you think about that, we're talking about the water industry investing £50 billion in 5 years to improve a load of things. So you can see it's quite a challenge. And obviously the point is a lot of that investment is going to go into the assets. So really what we're looking here is if we're going to invest in the information technology and operational technology to support those assets, we need to really be investing in an innovative way so that the benefits provided by the investment in the IT systems are not lost when the next cycle starts. What we're looking for really is a true transformational investment to develop longer term plans where possible, and we see that is where 5G is definitely one of the things that can support this aim. So as I said, 5G has been it's been posted as the digital transformation of networks in the telecoms sector. So really I don't see 5G as just being restricted to telecom sector. I think 5G is a true cross-sector technology because it touches so many other sectors. It's not just about people being able to talk on the phone or the internet. It's what else it enables in other sectors. So it is very much helping drive transformation in other sectors and other verticals, as we would call them. So really what we're looking for is how can 5G help with the organisation and cultural change inside the water industry. So like I said, what we're looking for is digital transformation really means a better way of doing things. So basically being more customer centric, but also I think having a better view of the actual workings of the business, be it how to control and monitor assets, or how to provide better customer service. So really what we're looking to do is use the 5G technology to underpin those organisation and cultural changes. Um, so really, 5G should be. I think one of the main things in digital transformation is not just the customer centricity, but it's also the fact that we're using data as the main driver to help improve the business. So we're looking at larger amounts of real-time data, meaning there's a far better ability to have I guess what we would call a real-time interactive view of how your water network, your water assets are all functioning and performing, but also that gives us a view of how the services are holding up. We can also use that data to look at long-term planning, but also predictive maintenance, predicting leakages. There's so many different things we can do with the data, but the point is we have to get that data all together, and 5G is one of the technologies that's going to allow us to do that in real time, but also from as Stuart said, the widely dispersed assets that are out there and the various technologies that are already there. So we can see 5G actually helping, I think, provide new connectivity solutions through the migration to 5G. So at the moment, the water industry, we do have we have we have the old machine to machine or SCADA kind of systems out there. We have some other competing technologies, some Wi-Fi based technologies, some local area technologies. There's a whole plethora of them out there. The point is they're all feeding into separate silos and systems. So what we really want to be able to do is use a technology like 5G to bring all of those various connectivity solutions together under one umbrella, which then allows us to gather the data into one place, and from there we should be able to drive the kind of insight we need to improve the services, to improve our customer quality of service as well. So that's really where we see one of the areas that 5G is really going to improve things. It should also help us implement new operating models in terms of how we're going to run the business and how things will connect together. What we're trying to do here is in the telecoms industry, 5G is seen very much as disrupting the value chain. But I would say in other sectors it's also going to have the same effect. It should hopefully help us to break down the silos where information basically travels vertically and then can only be shared in one silo, as we say. So we're really looking, again, as I said, to provide a more business-wide view, a single view of the business rather than a load of individual single panes. And then some of the other connectivity options we have with 5G, such as network slicing and edge processing, means that we can actually do a lot more of the heavy lifting in terms of analysing data and looking at what's going on closer to the actual source. We can also connect up more remote locations. We can also provide, I think, a more secure view of the assets, because I think one of the problems a lot of people have been worried about is the idea that we're going to automate networks and connect more sensors and stuff up, is the fact that there could be security exposures, which, we've seen problems before in other countries where people have hacked power stations. So the other point with 5G is that we can actually, I think, provide a far more secure control and management system, as well as a converged control and management system. It can also be more secure. We can also, I think, we're laying the groundwork as well, making this more of a data-centric view, but also the fact that the speeds and the latency that 5G supports, it allows us to look at more innovative solutions for our control and monitoring, so we can start leveraging such things as artificial intelligence and machine learning and I guess more advanced automation, but it also allows us to look at things such as real-time video, CCTV, the use of drones, and also then working up into the augmented and virtual reality area, so that we can actually start doing more visualization and simulation of the processes and the actual network itself. So we can see that they're the various assets that 5G would bring to play, and how maybe some of these could be transformational to the business. So if we move on to the next slide, this is just really a view of the various topics we're discussing. So I don't really want to go through them chapter and verse, but really we're just saying that putting 5G into the water sector, what kind of considerations can we have? So we've got the idea that we can combine the physical and digital world. So So this is coming out of the Internet of Things and digital twins. So this allows us through 5G support of massive machine type communications that we can actually deploy a lot more sensors and monitoring devices around the network. But also, again, harking back to the data idea, we can visualize data. We can actually create what we call a digital twin. And that works. So there's places such as Anglian Water and Yorkshire Water are already looking at the area of developing digital twins of their network, so they can actually model what's going on now, but they can also look at what if scenarios and also look at future planning. Immersive technologies are quite interesting because again, there's some work going on with AR and VR in Northumbrian Water to look at how they can look at remote support opportunities. So that basically you got this idea of being able to have somebody at site but have smart hands back at the centre to actually guide them through what they're doing through augmented and virtual reality. Video monitoring for assets and workforce safety, this is building off from the CCTV area, but it's not just people watching cameras. This is actually using artificial intelligence to analyse video streams to do a bit more of the work around understanding what is going on. And also combining that with drones, we've got the video monitoring, we've got the drones, we've got the ability to look at such things as in the Baltic Sea, we've got a trial going on which is monitoring the blue-green algae blooms. There's also a trial going on in China, which again is looking at the water surface to understand pollution in lakes. So this is kind of an ability to actually use visual clues before your actual sensors and monitors are picking up water quality issues. And then also this idea that 5G is being used in the utility sector, in the energy sector, to look at smart power grids. There's no reason why we can't also look at smart water grids. Again, the idea that 5G can enable what we're calling automated or self-organizing networks. There's the ability, I think, to also look at that as an enhancement to the existing water supply network to make it more smart or automated. And again, there's some trials going on in China around using 5G to support the distribution of power and energy in a smart way. So if we move on to the next slide, the report actually comes up with some key considerations to think about, and we've grouped them as three kind of headings: setting ambitions, achieving ambitions, and leveraging technology. So basically, in the setting ambitions, it's how do you address the challenge? So it's really trying to understand and prioritize the critical business challenges you're facing. But also understanding the art of the possible with technology. It's linking the technology to the challenges, rather than just investing in technology and then finding a way to use it. This is very much a case of what's our problem, then what technology will solve this problem, and then as part of that also, we don't feel that there's a one-stop shop for any of this. So really, it is a case of again engaging with the right ecosystem of partners. So it's a case that building consortiums to actually solve these problems, because there's a whole mix of different challenges here. You've got the assets, you've got the IT technology, you've got perhaps civil engineering problems to overcome. So you really do need a multidisciplinary ecosystem of partners all working together as a single entity to meet some of these challenges. So in terms of achieving the ambitions, again, as we're saying, we're seeing it as kind of a digital transformation. You really do have to think of the business planning and performance. So it's understanding what you want to do and then how you're going to be able to manage it. Then obviously, as we're saying that we can gather so much more data and drive a lot more insight, it should be a lot easier to understand the societal demands and consumption patterns as we're going along, and actually be able to maybe change the direction of the business in flight as we put this information in. We're obviously looking to achieve operational efficiency, and again, this comes down to, as we said, the 50 billion investment. You really want to be able to make sure that that's actually going to be saving you money, and also I think underwriting the consumer pricing. So therefore, we're not going to be able to increase prices by any more than Ofwat mandates. So therefore, operational efficiency has to come in hand to actually allow us to actually, I guess, make sure the profit and loss charts are correct. So that otherwise there will be problems. The other thing that is very important is, as we say, we're looking to transform the business, so there's got to be an investment and an understanding that you'll have to develop new skills. So we're talking about having to have more people who are aware of how to work with data, but also people who understand about how to understand the impact of new technology. So we're basically having to look at I think a complete investment in a new skills profile across the business. And then, as Stuart talked about, the environmental challenges. So really, we're looking to solve some of these challenges rather than to introduce new ones. So really, what we're looking to do is achieve a whole bunch of ambitions without causing more problems. So really, we're working within the framework of, we don't want to, tip the ecological scales any further than they are at the moment. If anything, we want to try and bring them back into more balance if we can. So it's very much a case again of how can we do all of these things without actually having a negative impact on the environment. And so then if we go into the last block, in terms of leveraging technology, as I said, there's a lot of data features a lot here because in terms of 5G and the devices we want to deploy, we're actually going to be using data, as I said, far more commonly than we do at the moment, to actually try and not only run the business but plan the business and also try and be more proactive. So we do need advanced analytics. We need to be able to exploit the data. We also need to be able to combine data with other people's data, because obviously we want to be able to not only look inside the business in terms of a data angle, we also want to see what external forces are actually impacting our business. So we do need to bring in data from other sources, so there will be this ability to exchange data as well as just exploit it. Harnessing 5G geographic coverage, as Stuart's already explained, and I think we've alluded to, the water industry has got a wide dispersal of assets, so we really do need to make sure that we've got this ubiquity of connectivity between all the assets that are part of the water ecosystem. And also that ubiquity means that the communications is harmonious. We have built-in resilience, we have security, we have to make sure all of that is right. So it's not just about security and privacy of the network, there's a whole data governance angle. So really we need to have end-to-end security and privacy, but also end-to-end data governance, because we have such things as the Data Protection Act and GDPR to be compliant to. So we need to make sure that whatever we're doing with our data fits within those frameworks. So it's really they're the key considerations. And if we move on to the next slide, really this paper, we're seeing it as a call to action. So Stuart and I, our email addresses will be at the end. So we're more than happy for anybody who wants to explore anything in any more depth to just send us an email or contact us. And I think that's really all we wanted to say today. But thank you for UK5G to give us the opportunity to work on this paper. Thank
Andrew,
you.
thank you, and Stuart, and
Yeah.
indeed Bob. Excellent, really, really good overview, and some critical insights as to why 5G might be appropriate, the challenges facing the water sector. Could I turn to our guest panelists and ask, do you identify with the challenges that were identified by Bob? By Stuart in his presentation. So I think we've chosen you to represent the three: the environmental, the asset base, and the customer engagement. And maybe I can start with the customer angle and Ofwat. So Harry, I hope you're there. Can't see all presenters.
I am. Can you hear me?
Excellent. Thank you, Harry. Thanks for joining us.
Can you? Yeah.
So we heard about some of the challenges associated with customer engagement. and the potential for application of 5G technologies to that issue. I wondered if you could perhaps take us on a bit of a journey and what your views are on that. Nope, Harry seems to be frozen. Okay. Jez, you deal with assets and with customers, and perhaps you could pick up there whilst we try to reinstall Harry.
Absolutely, and thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, definitely agree with the findings there and what they've kind of identified. I think particularly as I was reading through the report, I was struck with the way in which they've looked at the key to driving business outcomes, and particularly the area they talk about monitoring to predict network events. The network is our big hole in our awareness of what's going on. We have typically 8,000 sensors on one of our treatment works. The latency of us receiving information back from them is in milliseconds. We have SCADA systems and everything like that. So very good understanding of what's happening on the treatment works. At the end of our network, we have our customers. We've got roughly 1 every 12 meters in my company, and the latency of them not having water or it being discolored and picking up the phone to tell us about it is minutes. Okay, in between lies our distribution network. We have approximately 1 sensor every 1,000 properties. Okay, and the latency or the frequency and granularity, we're getting 15-minute granularity, but we only get that back every hour. And in some cases, companies will be getting that back every 4 hours, and then with a processing time. And so effectively what happens is your customers are reporting what's going on before you're aware of it and before your monitoring systems are picking up on it. And nowhere was that more evident than the Beast from the East, where customers were forming little groups upon social platforms, social media platforms, and saying, look, we know what's going on, but the companies were playing catch up in terms of their data gathering and also the analysis that goes with that. So I think that's a real key bit that they've picked up there. Sorry,
I didn't mean to interrupt. That's a very interesting scenario where you're utilizing your customers as your sensors.
Yeah, that's a terrible way to work. I have to say, I can't defend it at all. Customer as a sensor is not the way to do it. It's a bit like Amazon just sending out packages and just going, tell us if we got it wrong.
Great. Harry, I'm sure that Ofwat probably has some interesting views on that approach. And if you could try unmuting yourself, let's see if you've got connectivity without video.
Okay, hopefully this will work.
Great.
Yep, brilliant. All right, well, let me know if I drop off again. Yeah, so I caught some of that and some of the stuff before, but I'll try and give you a quick view, I guess. So I think based on some of what Jeremy was saying, there are lots of opportunities here to make better, more proactive decisions, to look forward. I guess one of our reflections on the industry at the moment is it's very reactive in the way that it functions, particularly with with issues or customer engagement. And there's obviously some way to go in terms of being able to respond to customers and provide them what they want. And some of that is potentially a technology response. And we're hoping through the innovation fund that we've set up that we're going to be able to give the sector both an indication that we want them to try out new technologies, but also new ways of working and new types of resolutions to some of the issues that have been highlighted, but also give them the space and the financial support to actually try some of that stuff out. And particularly on the consumer and customer side, we'd be very interested to see more projects focused on how companies engage with consumers, but also how they deal with some of those critical issues that have been highlighted earlier in the presentations. So these are definitely big problems, but we're hoping the Innovation Fund and the opportunities to engage with new innovators, non-traditional innovators, as well as some of those who are very active in the sector already, will be a really interesting opportunity to start exploring some unexpected and new and exciting ways of resolving some of those issues.
Excellent, thank you. Jez, well, I'll work backwards then. Jez, maybe you could keep on your riff regarding your sensors and your infrastructure, working back from the customer.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, monitoring access for predictive maintenance is a key area for us. And you've mentioned, Andrew talked about our buried assets and how we need to make best use of those. We have a very old asset base out there. We are doing replacement work upon that, but yes, we need to eke out the absolute best that we can get from the existing assets, and part of that is that monitoring system. So you have your kind of near real-time monitoring system to say, so this is what's actually going on, but also your understanding of those assets. And let's face it, we don't put them in the best place. A meter underground is not the best place to put an asset when you want to monitor what's going on with it. So yeah, no, completely identify with everything that this report has been picking up.
And then even before the water gets to you, before you treat it and stick it down those buried assets, we've got the whole catchment and all the people that work in the catchment. And Rachel, that's what Water Resources East is all about. Do you see a lot of yourself in this report?
Yes, I mean, definitely recognise and identify with the key challenges of this report. From a sort of a water resource management perspective, it's difficult. We're having the need for real-time data exchange, often in assets, particularly I guess in Water Resources East region, but certainly in the other regional groups as well, where you've got assets in rural or remote locations with existing limited connectivity to, say, fixed broadband connections is a challenge. And if 5G can help with that, I know maybe there's people on this webinar that would think that maybe some existing we're not utilising the existing 4G technologies. It's not an area that that I'm an expert in, but we're working with a lot of agriculture farmers, landowners, and if we were able to put more instruments into those catchments, and at Water Resources we're working at different levels, from sort of farm individual business level through to catchments, through to even county level. Is that the best way? Don't know. And then on to sort of a regional level. And I think it's been said many times, and the OEC also said it when it says that it considers that the global water crisis, and particularly in the UK as well, that it's not so much that it's lack of water resources, but bad management of water, and we just don't know what is out there, what's in rivers, what's in even ditches that might cause pollution. So not only in terms of sort of making sure that the water companies have the water that they need, but we as resource groups, and Water Resources East is working on this at the moment as well, is what is the environmental need? So what's the destination? How much do we need to keep in the environment to help it recover and flourish? And again, if you haven't got instruments and the 5G connectivity to know that, then we're kind of second guessing. So
you've got to be able to measure it to manage it.
That's the old adage, isn't it? But then, but then also you can have an overload of, and I'm sure we'll come on to that, of too much data that we just
well, absolutely. And well, let's stay with that for a moment. I noted that in his talk, Andrew mentioned edge processing and doing a lot of the work closer to the device. I read a horrendous report earlier in the year about the enormous explosion in energy requirements, and indeed water requirements, for cooling data centers. And we're looking at, 40,000 gigawatt hours per year of energy to manage the data in the US alone. Is this something that we can countenance, just generating more and more data, or will 5G help us overcome that? Perhaps I can start with Andrew.
Yeah, because 5G is, there's various numbers out and about, but we're talking about being able to save a lot of the cost in terms of energy costs if we move to 5G over existing networks such as 4G. We're talking perhaps some people are saying up to 90%. I'm not sure if that's that's attainable, but we're talking about significant reduction in network energy usage, purely because 5G is a far more efficient technology in terms of the spectrum propagation. So we don't have to turn the power up in the base stations as much. The other idea is that we'll be using far more I guess macro cells, or smaller sort of micro cells, kind of the would be using smaller cells with smaller defined ranges, so therefore they will use less power. Also, in terms of the actual assets, so if we're moving more towards the IoT side and NB-IoT, we're talking there about sensors and assets which can run off a watch battery for 25 years, or we're talking about perhaps even using solar power. But the point is, we're talking about, again, one of the ideas is, and I think Telefonica UK are one of the people pushing this, is, they see 5G as one of their routes to becoming a net zero company. So they really, and as you say, putting stuff at the edge, so you're processing more and more of the data at the edge of the network should, as you say, you're using less power to transmit data back to the core, and you're using less. So basically, again, and of course the other problem is the bigger the data center gets, it starts heating itself up anyway. You've got to cool these things, so therefore you're spending more and more money on cooling this as well as the power to process this stuff. So if you can move more and more, so 5G gives us the ability to split the control plane and the data plane, so therefore we can do more and more of the processing where it's most sensible to do it, and that's important.
It's not the level of detail that appears in the report, but to have some of that explanation is fantastic. Thank you for that.
Right.
Harry, I recognise that you might have to leave, so we want to pick your brains as much as we can whilst you're still with us. Regulation and innovation, it's a knotty issue that gets kicked around all the time. Does regulation hinder innovation in the water sector?
Maybe before I try and give a short answer to that question, I'll pick up on what was just discussed, because I think there's some really good points there. And I'm going to keep banging on about the Innovation Fund. As it relates to the Innovation Fund that we'll be sending out more information about very soon, I think the couple of key points that were made. So one, emerging technologies are going to be really important for resolving a lot of these big challenges and ensuring that we have a more resilient system, one that, as was said earlier, we manage better, and technology is definitely a part of that. But I think there are a lot of data sets that already exist, and there's a lot of kind of underlying fundamental things that need to be resolved to make the best use of the existing data and any new data sets or any new information that we start collecting. So trying to make sure that there is cohesion in the sector, that there's more collaboration, between water companies, but also, with the supply chain and other actors in this space is going to be really important. And again, that's something that we'd really love to see more of through the Innovation Fund. But, there is also a question about how do we embed more of that collaborative culture into the sector going forward. That we're not going to be able to have innovation funds every kind of price review cycle. So what role will something like the proposed Centre of Excellence play in that? How is that going to engage with all of the companies and be that centralized position, try and improve things like data standardization? Will it happen through the Centre of Excellence? How would that engage with other actors in this space? I think those kind of questions, along with some of the other questions about building the right skill sets and expertise in the use of data and technology, are going to be as critical to making the most out of these technologies and that data as having new technologies and 5G and 6G and whatever emerging technologies that we're going to focus on and invest in. So I think a general call, and I think this is true across any sector and any kind of industry, is get the basics right as well, and then you'll be able to build on that with some of this technology. And I think for the Innovation Fund, we are as interested in how do you solve some of those knotty issues, more basic issues, in an innovative way, as how do you use some of the shiny new technology. So that's a kind of quick point on that. On your very thorny question about the relationship between regulation and innovation, I could talk about this for a long time. It's difficult to answer because I think a lot of this is pent up in existing narratives about that relationship between kind of industry and regulation. Regulation can be a force for innovation, and I think there are plenty of examples, both in water and in other areas, where actually regulatory action, whether that's through regulations or other actions, can force an industry to innovate in ways that benefit both industry and customers and the environment, etc. On the flip side, there are ways in which too prescriptive regulations or too complicated regulatory systems, and we do recognise that there are some elements of the water regulation area that do fall into that, and we are interested in looking and discussing those areas, can prevent and can give signals to the sector that we are interested in a narrow range of things. What we're hoping is that this innovation fund and other activities that we're doing around it is a signal that Ofwat is very interested in the sector trying new things and challenging us on the way that we're regulating or our things that we prescribe or expect, if we can see the benefits of these new ways of doing things or these new approaches. And so through the Innovation Fund, hopefully we're going to see a lot of those ideas come through, and that will open up a new channel in which we can kind of discuss some of those things. But I think a short answer to the question is very context based, but regulation can be a force for good, and we shouldn't forget that there are other very strong non-regulatory barriers to innovation that exist within lots of different sectors and industries, and some of those are cultural and some of those are kind of systemic, and we need to focus on those as much as the regulatory barriers, and that's something that I hope the industry is going to be keen on looking at. And I think a number of companies are thinking about their internal barriers to embedding an innovation culture, and how do they resolve that.
Thank you for that, Harry. You must get fed up with being poked with that particular stick, but
well, that's fine. Yeah.
It's always good to start a conversation. Jez, do you recognise that that analysis?
Absolutely, yes. In terms of where we're moving forward, I think it's kind of, I've been in the industry 25 years. I'd like to say I've seen loads of change, but our industry is slow to change. And I think that's probably something that everybody listening on this webinar has probably recognised in the water industry. We are a cautious industry in terms of innovation. There's reasons behind that. I saw a presentation recently from Foster and Partners to the utility industries, and they showed these wonderful buildings and explained all the amazing innovations that they bring in. And at the end of it, they asked my comment, and I said, it's fantastic, but I'd really like to see what you could do for a 100-year building that you're only allowed to change 1% of each year. Okay. It's a slow rate of change. We've got a lot of assets out there and a very low replacement rate as we're going through those. So it's tricky for us to manage. And when you look at our customers, they typically want three things. They go, we want low water bills, we want always available, and we want it to be absolutely clean. Okay, well, generally we are the lowest utility bill. We are 99.9% available, and we're 99.9% pure. It's really hard to go from there. Okay. We're in a situation where we only have one network. It's unlike the telecoms industry where you can roll out a second network over your network and then deprecate the existing one. We've only got one network. And therefore, as soon as you start to look at doing things on that network, there's a natural cautiousness about, will it affect my availability and will it affect my purity? Okay, so you can say, oh yeah, if we trial this new system out, there's a small chance that in the short term it's going to increase our burst rates, but we're pretty certain there's long-term benefits. That is instantly going to make the water companies very cautious about how they proceed.
And that must make it very difficult to build a business case for this kind of transformational move to something like 5G. Stuart, that must be dismal news for your ears, trying to sell this as a business stream. What are the constraints on building a business case around something like movement to 5G or a digital platform?
I mean, I kind of think I need to take the Fifth Amendment, and given that I'm representing a technology company and our job is basically, trying to build these business cases. I mean, I think if we're honest, I'm sure we can all come up with examples of technology transformation programs that haven't delivered on the objectives that were trailed. So I think it is a difficult thing to do, to build that that case. I think it is a bit different for the water industry as well. I mean, Jez has talked about how the industry, I mean, it has to take a risk, a very risk-based approach to transformation and to building the business cases. And I think the other, there's another sort of economic driver for the industry as well. They have to commit to certain outcomes in their regulatory business plans, and in effect, if they fail to achieve those outcomes, they're penalised for that. And so I think there's an understandable focus on making sure that plans are achievable and deliverable, and that maybe does reduce the appetite for taking risk when it comes to technology deployment, for example. I think in other sectors, decisions to invest can probably be made on a more short-term basis, as maybe even say a less robust business case basis. The bar is probably a bit lower. I mean, I think a challenge with any building an investment case for any kind of emerging tech really is what's your baseline? What's your reference point against which you calibrate the business case? So if something's genuinely new and it's genuinely transformational, where do you reference your start point? How do you know what it's going to achieve? I mean, I guess the other thing in respect of building business cases is just reflecting on 2020, really. It's not been a typical year, right? And I think we've probably all seen examples of where investment decisions have been made more quickly, perhaps with less analysis, just because there's a compelling reason to act and a compelling reason to do something. And I think it will be very interesting to see whether that more dynamic and kind of agile approach persists.
That's a really interesting. Sorry, Jez, go ahead.
I was going to carry on rather. Having started painting a rather pessimistic picture, I was actually going to switch my conversation and say, having said that, I am now seeing more change in my industry than I've seen in years, and I'm seeing more appetite for change than I have ever seen before. And there's two things that's driving that. Number one is we have, our regulator is pushing us hard to innovate. You look at the 15 plus, so every company has a leakage level. Our regulator has turned around and said, look, regardless of where that kind of economic level of leakage is, and that's been used for years to kind of say, okay, this is where you set that. They've gone, look, regardless of where you are, we want you all to drive that down by 15 or more %. So some companies got 20% reductions over the next 5 years. That's very challenging to our industry. And the result of that is we're seeing a drive towards innovation we've never seen before. Okay, how we deal with our customers, our regulator asking us to engage with customers in a way that we've never done before. Again, that's driving innovation in our industry. And what's been really great, as Harry's already talked about this, is that at the same time as driving us to innovate, they are allowing funds for us to actually do that innovation as well. So, I will say optimistically, and I am generally an optimist about these things, I would say the next 5 years are going to be some of the most fascinating in the UK water industry. And I've predicted, looking at smart networks, I said, look, 20 years ago, in terms of leakage, companies used to come to the UK to understand how to do these things. Everybody caught up and everybody overtook us. My gut reaction, looking at Europe and looking at the worldwide and looking at the conversations I'm having at the moment, is that over the next 2 to 3 years, we will start to see companies coming back to the UK to find out how to do it best. Okay, we are in that absolute position of driving some of the best innovation in the world because of where we're being pushed at the moment.
Well, I'm not going to have any of this positivity. I've got to challenge. No, actually, that's genuinely surprising to me. That's good news, but obviously it's not going to be all plain sailing. Rachel, what are the difficulties that we face in implementing a digital solution such as we're talking about here?
I'll just come, Jonathan, I'll just come on to that, but I just wanted to add to what everybody was saying there about the innovation. And I think it was Andrew mentioned earlier in his presentation about being able to break down silos within organisations, but actually innovation goes beyond that. And what we're doing at Water Resource East as well is working across sectors on this. So in terms of the investment case, we're already sort of trialling the art of the possible with other organisations, for example, in Lincolnshire with the County Council, the IDBs, the Environment Agency, even down to citizen science. So with the Rivers Trust looking at sort of individuals, just because there are shared benefits. And so if there's shared benefits, then there's potential obviously for shared investment up front. So I think we'll see a lot more innovation in terms of how we manage catchments and regions, not just by water companies, obviously, but by co-investment from other organisations, because they get the benefit as well from these technologies in particular. And then in terms of challenges of implementing such data, I think, I mean, I also come from a behavioural change background. And, you know, one of the key things is, of course, making it as easy to act as possible. And often, you know, rollouts of new phones, even just simple phones, we don't, as humans, take best advantage of it because we are hard engineered to go the shortcut way, the way that we always know. And already we have an amass, I think somebody mentioned DRIP, which I love that acronym, in terms of data rich, information poor within the water industry. I'm sure there's other areas of industries as well like this, where we have a huge amount of data, but we're just not using it. And it comes down to humans actually interpreting the data that these systems are giving to us. So I think, you know, whatever rolls out, and even with existing systems, you know, that we've got to have strong cultural change departments or behavioural change departments, or, you know, whatever we want to call it, in order to take people with us. And there will be some resistance, but, you know, ultimately, in terms of efficiencies, we certainly need to implement behavioural change techniques on staff and on customers as well.
That's really interesting about the behavioural change and the cultural change, because there are some quite horrifying figures about demographics in the water sector and the number of people about to retire over the next 5 years. So we really need to be upskilling and recruiting differently to the sector.
And I mean, there is a huge skill shortage, you know, technically and within the water industry, and we have to start, well, you know, we're already, you know, water companies and others are already starting, but we need to fill that gap, apprenticeships and various other ways to fill that gap. Yeah, we are going to lose a huge amount of knowledge soon.
I'm conscious that our audience will be partly water sector folk and partly 5G and comms people. So swinging it back away from the water piece slightly, a lot of what we've discussed could be done with other solutions. Could I ask Andrew to address why 5G? What are the technical advantages? What is it bringing to us that we can't do with SCADA, with 4G, with LoRaWAN, and so on? Either he doesn't like that question, or he's on mute, or he's left.
I was on mute. I was talking into space. That's not so good, though. So yes, thanks for that, Jonathan. I think you know, if we take away the headline numbers about 5G, the fact it's, you know, we're talking about millisecond response time, ability to support 1 million devices per square kilometre, you know, 10 gigabit speeds into a cell site, you know. They're the kind of numbers people talk about, but what does that really mean in practical terms? So the point is, you know, we've been looking at remote processing for a while. I mean, last year we conducted a trial on edge processing with 4G. The problem was in 4G we couldn't, you know, getting a bit techie, but in telecommunications you have a control plane and a data plane. The problem in 4G was we couldn't split the data plane and the control plane, so that actually meant that you couldn't leave the data at the edge and process it. You had to back all the data to the center. So straight away, when you're talking about lots of remote sites, are you then going to have to haul the data back from all these remote sites, centrally process them, or is there a way that you can actually, you know, do more of the processing at the edge, especially when you're talking about, say, treatment plants? Why can they not be sort of almost you know, edge data centers in their own right? So, you know, and then using that processing at the edge and the latency means that you can support business critical systems in real time, which, you know, is an important area, I think. Again, the number of devices that need to be supported, you know, this is going to be quite important when we start looking at, you know, some of the more sensor intensive stuff. So if we're going to start talking about, trying to monitor the end-to-end processing through a processing plant with multiple sensors, or even, putting multiple sensors in water courses, we start getting to the point where, are we actually going to be at the edge of the technology we've got? I mean, the other point is that even though we say 4G is 99% coverage, what they're talking about is population. They're not talking about geographical area. If you look at 4G in the UK, last year, 66% of the England was covered by 4G, and only 34% of Scotland had 4G coverage by area. So when we start talking about, let's not just talk about water. We talk about agriculture, other areas. How are you going to get the signal to those areas with 4G? You might as well, are you going to invest in 4G or are you going to invest in 5G, knowing that 5G will give you some of these other added capabilities, such as the edge processing and the faster latency. The other point is 5G is going to support, 5G, one of the bands supported in 5G is 700 megahertz, which is, right next to the TV signal. So we know that's got a very good propagation characteristic for large rural areas. So we've got the ability to maybe look at satellite backhaul, which is also something we've been looking at as a hybrid network. There's the ability even to use 5G as a backhaul technology for other, so really the point is it's an enabler to allow us to look at better ways of connecting stuff up. I think it may not be the panacea, but it's definitely something that can improve the existing situation, I think. And that's maybe the way to look at it. And if you're going to go greenfield, would you install 4G, or would you look at maybe, looking at 5G with the potential that, it should help you in terms of energy consumption, but also the network deployment you're going to do. The fact is, 5G, it's still a maturing technology. So, people talk about 6G. That's going to be an improvement on 5G. It's not going to be rip out 5G. I think 5G's been touted as a network. So in fact, you could converge everything onto a 5G core if you really had the capacity to do it today. So I think the point is it's an enabler, but it's a vital tool in enabling transformation.
All that to me sounds eminently reasonable. However, I see from the chat box it's provoking some response. So
obviously, well, that's the whole point, wasn't it?
And that's why we undertake these Q&A. So I hope that's answered some of the points that we made by Rory and Jeremy. By the way, some great surnames on here: Jeremy Writer and Dave Happy, which I think is fantastic. Moving on from that, another question that's been asked on the Q&A is whether 5G is a solution in search of problems. I think you've touched on it there. How well aligned is the 5G platform? I'm probably using the term wrongly there, and the challenges faced by the water sector.
I think the point is we see this as it's an old term, but business-led outcomes. So basically, we're looking to use the technology to solve the problems, not put the technology in and then find a problem to solve. So I mean, we've been doing some work as well in connected communities or smart cities, and some of the stuff that we're doing there doesn't need 5G, so we will sweat the 4G asset. But if you also look at the way the telecom operators are going, they're putting 5G in the urban areas because of the amount of fibre that's there, but they're not swapping out 4G. They're putting 5G in where 4G didn't actually connect up to people. So basically, if a lot of the 5G at the moment is being infill where 4G doesn't actually stretch. So I think the point is 5G is seen as a more flexible technology. It's not, as I said, it's not a case of ripping everything out and starting again. It's very much a case of let's look at what your problems are, and then we'll work out what we'll work out the outcomes. Then that'll give us the use cases, and then from the use cases, the technology selection will be made. I think is really working backwards from outcomes to technology, not technology. Then what outcome can I get from it? It's really that's so. Yeah, maybe 5G isn't the answer to everything, but you know, it's important to understand the problems before you worry about the technology.
So flipping it on its head then,
Yeah.
Jez,
Yeah.
you presumably then have been coming at this from the opposite direction. What's your perception?
I certainly think there's a lot of potential there, and I look at, you know, there's three kind of areas which 5G are addressing, which I look at and go, okay, how would that help solve some of our problems? You know, the massive machine type communications, that's very definitely something I'm looking at the smart networks side on. We have, you know, comms issues there. We have tried other solutions in there, and we're running a smart network just south of London at the moment. We're using an IoT solution there, and that's proving extremely valuable. The amount of information that we're getting back and the data levels that we're getting back are an order of magnitude better than anything we've had in the past. And I spoke about, you know, customer as a sensor being unacceptable. What we're now starting to see is that we are on the front foot so that we know before our customers do. Okay, we're able to react before our customers are aware there's a problem. That's the goal. That's surely where we want to be as water companies, that we're in that kind of situation. And so the massive machine type comms, that's the one I look at from that side. When I look at the ultra reliable and low latency side, instantly I'm looking at my SCADA networks and thinking, okay, so we have, you know, with our SCADA, we will have multiple redundancy. We have very distributed sites, yeah, with multiple redundancy going to those sites. And that is a real headache for us trying to manage that. So I'm extremely interested in the ultra reliability side, and because it's SCADA, the low latency as well, because you need to be able to react in near real time if you've got pumps starting up and things like that. There's great interest from me on that side as well. And then I look at the enhanced mobile broadband, the fact that I can get a lot more data in and out from my field staff. And there's that ability that we can look at of actually informing our staff as they are working on the network, the effect that they're having. So one of the things that we have within the water industry is water pressure transients. My generation of what I call the lost generation on transients, meaning that I came into the industry just as everything started to go digital, and we were sampling every 15 minutes. As a result of that, we lost the information about pressure transients that was coming through, that the previous generation who used to sit and watch a pressure gauge at 3 o'clock in the morning would actually see the transients moving through the network. We are now sampling at far higher data rates, and we've got a far better understanding of how these transients are occurring. We know that part of them is down to our network operations, but it's really difficult to see, as you're operating a valve in near real time, the effect you are having upon a network that may be 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers away, and that change is happening within milliseconds, seconds, okay? One of the things I'm really interested in is the ability to take that edge processing and saying, okay, can we actually be returning data from that network in near real time to the person operating the network so they can actually understand what's going on as they operate equipment?
Fascinating. And I thought in terms of staff the other day, I was looking at some of the Upware big questions, and I remember early discussions around that. One of the big issues with water companies is staff safety. And the biggest problem in terms of staff safety is not operating big, heavy machines, it's driving to and from site. If you can reduce driving miles by operating machines remotely using that kind of equipment, you will impact on the safety of site staff enormously. So yeah, there's a whole load of different use cases. It's a whole new world we're we're approaching. I'd like to, if I can, just have a look at where the value accrues in implementing this kind of activity using 5G. So I think yesterday when we were introducing ourselves, you spoke about avoidance of penalties as much as anything. Can you elaborate on that a little, and perhaps Rachel can pick up?
Yeah, so if you go on any water company's website, you will find their business plan for the next 5 years. And as part of that, we will see the kind of rewards and penalties, and there are rewards as well, that we get for operating as a company. So we put in our plan and we say, this is what we've got to do. And I've mentioned leakage as a good example. We have to hit a 15% reduction in terms of leakage. If we fail that, there's a penalty. Okay, we've got ODIs in terms of, operational delivery incentives, in terms of things like supply interruptions. Okay, so how long must our customers be off? Yeah, or are we allowed to have customers off from water? And it's very, very low indeed. If we exceed that target, there's rewards. If we fail that target, there's penalties against that. The beauty of these is it actually makes cost cases extremely, well, I won't say extremely, but far easier to make than they were. Because we look at it and say, okay, if I fail to achieve that, I can clearly define now how much that's going to cost me as a company. Yeah, I've got a very clear definition. Now, obviously, I can throw in other things against that about customer contacts, about the cost of all the other things that will go on with that. But the regulators actually made it incredibly simple for us to go, okay, this is a really strong incentive for me to put in systems that enable me to achieve this target, because there's benefit to me if I can get it, and there's penalties if I don't get it. So it's one of the things I would strongly advise anybody that's talking to a water company. Okay, go to their website beforehand and find their operational delivery incentives, find what they've got to achieve in this next AMP. There's some that are common to all companies, okay, and there's some that will be individual to each companies. And if you understand those, when you walk through the door and you say, look, here's my business case and I can relate it to these, that instantly ticks a load of boxes for me, because somebody's actually taken the trouble to relate it to my problems.
That's one of my mantras when I talk to any of the technology companies I advise, is go onto the website and see what's causing them pain. It's the same for any sales, I guess, or marketing. That's probably music to Harry's ears, what you've just said there, that they're making it easy for you. Not so easy for you in your position, Rachel, I guess, to find the value proposition for 5G.
Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes.
Yes, we can.
I wasn't sure whether I muted myself. My screen's gone rather funny. Certainly as well in terms, that value point, and widening it out now to the catchment and the region. You think about, obviously, we start off with a 25-year environment plan, the government's 25-year environment plan, and all the policies that are coming from that in terms of the environment bill. And of course the move to ELMS, the environmental land management system. Again, having the technology that will allow us to measure and value natural assets, natural capital assets, is only going to be a good thing because of the value. So in terms of, we're looking at nature-based solutions to manage a lot of the issues that the water industry is facing in terms of storage of water, but in terms of reducing flooding by looking at, you look at a river that's about to burst its banks and flood roads or communities. If you could take that water and then store it elsewhere so that it reduces that, so you're actually using storage as a flood mitigation measure. But all this can't happen if you haven't got the instruments and the technology joining it all together. So it's not just the value of, and I've worked in the water industry, not as long actually as Des, only 17 years. So there's certainly the value in terms of reducing, in terms of pollution incidents and various other things, but actually the value that will come about in terms of nature-based solutions and actually managing in the catchment, the environment, as well as for many abstractors as well.
I don't know whether you've been reading the questions, but that was one from Andrew. So hopefully that's touched on what you've asked there, Andrew, about use of the Environment Agency and addressing flooding issues through deploying 5G. Conscious that we're close to the time at which we're supposed to finish. Quickly scanning the questions that have been asked. How do you see 5G enabling a better take-up by the water industry of various solutions offered by satellite Earth observation data? Oh, music to my ears. I'm currently working with 2 water companies. We're looking at doing knowledge transfer partnerships around satellite observation. So interesting. I think this is probably more of a techie question. So perhaps Andrew or Stuart could pick that one up. Okay. 5G and satellites.
Yeah, well, yeah, we actually have an Earth observation team and a satellite team. So yeah, we are looking at this stuff a lot. I mean, one of the areas that was quite interesting a while ago, we were looking at we were starting to look at topology planning for networks, and one of the areas we were looking at was to use satellite imagery to understand how foliage grew and receded over time, because that's going to affect signal propagation. So that's one area we looked at. There's also been use before on satellite technology in the Netherlands, looking at these enormous market garden greenhouses and observing from above. You can actually spot where the warm air is escaping from the buildings. So, you know, there's a definite use for satellite imagery in here, I think, for these kind of situations, to help with the planning and also feeding into the digital twins that we need in real life. Because basically, you know, the whole point would be, one of the areas that's been touted with 5G, to actually build you know, a digital twin of the network that runs in real time, that you can then so the sensors and the devices feeding back the signal information, you can actually get an accurate real-time view of how the propagation of the spectrum is across the whole of the ecosystem and the estate, feeding in Earth observation data about such things as cloud and you know, mist, fog, as I said, foliage changes and all that can also help with understanding that propagation modelling. Because when we start talking about millimetric wave, the higher frequencies, you know, that stuff can get stopped by a very nasty drizzle. You know, it's gonna, you know, so really, we're quite interested in this whole idea of being able to understand real-time propagation, but also, like I said before, with what's going on in China and in the Baltic, using imagery and assessing it to look at such things as, you know, surface contamination of water, but also also understanding that maybe the safest maintenance route to get to certain parts of the estate, because obviously you know, when we talk about remote places, you can get such things as, you know, landslips and stuff like that, which actually block the original route. So understanding how your assets look from above is probably just as important as understanding how they look from a sensor telling you what they're doing. So I think there's definitely a place for this, definitely. And I think, you know, the more, you know, and again, what we're talking about here is combining, you know, data coming from sensors with actual data from, say, CCTV or Earth observation. It gives you a far better picture of your, you know, of your assets and stuff. I mean, people are using drones to look at the turbine blades on these massive, you know, on the massive wind generation stations, because again, you know, it's very hard to get somebody up there on a ladder to look at a turbine blade. It's far easier to have a drone, and we can see more of that being used. I mean, just as an example, you know, in the oil industry, you know, they're spending $15 billion a year as an industry on asset maintenance, spares, and performance, but their availability is 97%. So, you know, that's not really optimal, is it? And the maintenance cost is about 2.5% of the asset replacement value, and the spares cost is about 1% of the asset replacement value. So they're running, you know, quite a lot of money there, and a 2% availability improvement on a $20 billion oil company actually gives you a saving of about $11 million and 7 days of production saved. You know, so that, I mean, we also had a look at a Swedish pulp mill, where the boiler is the main part of it. If that fails, they're losing 200,000 euros an hour. You know, so you know, these are the kind of numbers you're looking at if you get these things working properly. So, you know, that's the important thing, I think, to understand from it. It's not just about, you know, cost savings in terms of, you know, operational. It's about the whole picture of what you can do with this, I think.
Very proud to say that EPN was instrumental in the deployment of drones on turbine blade inspections. So there's another one for us.
Yeah.
So just quickly, I think this will have to be our final point before we go to Bob to close. Satellites, Rachel, Jez, are these tools that you're deploying or looking to deploy? I think that's Rachel first.
Sorry, for me, no, it's one to look at amongst our members and partners, but no, I think, you know, but that you know, that's the opportunity in terms of, you know, what else is out there. So, you know, I'm certainly interested in hearing particularly the participants, what there is, so that we can look at and produce real. And that's the point of what we're doing with our water resource management plan, is actually flagship pilots to see what works, what doesn't work, and not an area I'm familiar with, but if there's experts out there, let's look at what we can do on the ground in our region with partners and members.
Wonderful. Yes.
Yeah, so from a leakage point of view, satellite technology is being used, or let me say trialed, and in some cases used in the UK. So the Australians developed this particularly well, and we're using satellite technology to profile where leakage was taking place. A number of companies have tried it in the UK, and had, I will be honest, and had a variety of results. It was very interesting. I did an exercise last year where I persuaded every water company to share their innovations for leakage, what they're working on. It's available on the We're Big Questions, called a leakage innovation heat map, and it maps out all of the innovation that's taking place in water leakage at the moment in the UK by company. And on there, it was able to see there were a number of companies doing it, and some had tried it and couldn't get it to work, and some were trialing it and then saying, yes, it's brilliant, and we're going to be using it more and more. I think for me, that raises really interesting questions about why, and that's one of the things I'm brokering at the moment, is far more discussion between those companies, because I need to understand why it worked in one area but not in another. Certainly, in terms of the satellite side, it gives us a localization that there is a leak potentially in that area. I think I'd be really interested in the ability to take that data and combine that with near real-time data coming back from the acoustic nets that we're starting to see out there. So a number of companies are employing acoustic technology, either through hydrophones or accelerometers, out into their networks, and we're seeing more of this grow. So the whole of Birmingham is covered by an acoustic net system that's listening all the time for leaks on the pipes. Now, the combination of that with other technologies like satellite would be extremely interesting. The ability to run it in near real time, actually, as your guys are out on site, becomes even more powerful.
Mm. Amazing. Harry, I've got sidetracked down some technical routes there. I'd like to give you the opportunity to pitch your innovation fund again, because I recognise there will be some. No, Harry, I'm being told. Harry's had to drop off. He told us that he might.
Shall I quickly, Jonathan? I'm aware of what's going on with that.
Sure.
So very quickly, the innovation fund is £200 million, which Ofwat are effectively allowing the companies to raise and use over this AMP period. So it'll be up until 2025. The fund will be in two ways. There is an innovation in water challenge, which is for smaller projects, typically up to 250K. That's being launched in January, February time. Okay, and effectively that will be the companies will need to partner up with the water company, but effectively that's a bit more of a kind of Dragon's Den style, effectively coming and saying, here's the kind of problem statements and here's the solutions that we can offer. The larger sum, so kind of 40 million plus per year, that will be from the water companies will be able to apply for that, but they'll do that in partnership with other companies. And Ofwat have already made it clear they want to see collaboration on here. So if I can get together a group of 5 water companies and 2 suppliers as well to work on a project, they're far more willing to look on those kind of approaches. But the application would come through the water companies. So what I would suggest is that if you do have innovations, and there needs to be innovations, not existing products, but innovations that you are looking to develop at the moment, is to be speaking to the water companies. Again, I would suggest going straight to their websites and looking at their innovation needs, if they've got those up on the site, or looking at their ODIs. What are the problems that they're trying to solve?
Terrific. Thank you very much. In a nutshell, fantastic. So I see that Anita's telling me to shut up, because we've gone past 11:30 and we've lost a few participants, and obviously people have other commitments. So thank you very much to all the participants. It's been revelation to me to hear some of the 5G stuff, and hopefully everybody else has learned something new as well. If you want to continue the conversations or pick up some of the points that we haven't been able to address, please do use the meeting mojo. We're all going to sign up to it. So if you want to pick our brains, do drop us a line on that, and we'll see if we can continue the conversation. At this point, I'll hand over to Bob Apologies for the lateness, Bob. I'll allow you to close the proceedings.
That's okay. I had lengthy summary that I was going to deliver, but I think we're past time. So all I can say is that I think that the message that I've had from this session is that 5G is an important technology platform. It's certainly not a panacea. And what's needed is for the water industry to think about what the solutions are needed, what the challenges are, and for the right technology mix to be applied to deliver those solutions. And I just want to add my thanks really to everybody else, and thank you to CGI for producing the report. I think it's very useful, and also to the panel, which have been great, and also to the participants, of course. There's a number of questions that I hope we managed to answer, and for those who haven't had their questions answered, they can always engage with UK5G and we can attempt to answer them. So thank you very much, and thank you for everybody for the session.